Alright, I'll admit it, my quest for horror-based mech games this October probably won't yield a treasure trove of hits. There's a very good chance I'm in for disappointment. Sure, I could torture myself by slogging through Epidemic and its punishing, soul-crushing difficulty, just hoping it'll offer something better than its predecessor Kalik, but honestly, that's not what I call fun, and isn't that kind of the whole point of video games?
What's not exactly supposed to mean? What are you talking about?
I'm all for a challenge, but if I'm going to subject myself to that kind of experience, I at least want it to be something that grabs me from the moment I started up. Epidemic, well, it just doesn't. Now, I'm not saying there are no games that combine the mechanical splendor of mechs with the unsettling thrills of horror. In fact, I've had a few recommendations tossed my way, and I've even given some of them some serious thought. The problem is, most of these games either never saw a release outside of Japan, or lean heavily into genres that aren't exactly my style, especially visual novels with certain adult elements that YouTube wouldn't appreciate. Even if I were interested in playing something like that, which frankly I'm not, diving into that kind of content on my channel would be a hard pass. Even the concept of covering a visual novel is a bit daunting to me. Maybe someday, but not today. But just as I was about to abandon this somewhat ill-fated quest for a perfect horror mech hybrid, I remembered a game that holds a special place in my heart, Robotica. Or as it's known in Europe, Robotica, Cybernation Revolt, and Daedalus in Japan. There are no real differences between the versions except for the names. The North American and European titles are, let's be honest, a bit cheesier than the more subtle Daedalus, which is a clever play on words combining dead and Daedalus. But hey, it was the mid-90s, and back then, titles like that were considered cool and clever. Trust me, I was there. My experience with Robotica goes back to when I first started this channel and began discovering titles like Gun Griffin and its Japanese-only sequel. Robotica was the first game that truly showed me what the Sega Saturn was capable of. Up until that point, I'd only ever seen full 3D environments used in the backgrounds of platformers or golf games. But Robotica was different. It immersed me in a fully realized world of corridors and mechanical monstrosities. After playing it, I found myself delving deeper into the Sega Saturn's vast, often overlooked library of games, and that exploration sparked my lasting fascination with the system. Robotica takes place in the year 2877, but its roots go much deeper, kicking off way back in 2077. After years of escalating global tensions, peacekeeping organizations like the United Nations and the European Union finally crumbled. With the world on the brink of chaos, humanity took a drastic step, forming a planetary government called the World Silent Security Service, or WSSS for short. And they didn't just stop at Earth. They expanded their control to outer space, operating from their orbital headquarters, the central control station Daedalus, which looms over the planet. For over 800 years, the WSSS maintained their iron grip, snuffing out any opposition, dismantling old unions and organizations along the way, and establishing a totalitarian rule over humanity. But as with any long-standing regime, cracks started to form. With the original founders long gone, people began questioning whether the WSSS still served humanity's best interests. Due to this, the reformist faction was formed, a rebel group intent on overthrowing the WSSS and putting an end to their centuries-long tyranny. Their plan? Send in 3 elite pilots equipped with Laucorn-class assault robots to infiltrate Daedalus and destroy it from within. Naturally, things go horribly wrong. 2 of the Laucorns are destroyed almost immediately, leaving just 1. And that one is you. Now it's up to you, the player, to navigate the endless, labyrinthine corridors of Daedalus, fend off relentless waves of robotic enemies, and maybe, just maybe, bring down the WSSS once and for all. Before I delve deeper into the darker, creepier aspects of this game, I've got to take a moment to appreciate the design of the Laucorn mechs. These things really steal the show. There was a brief moment in the mid-90s when game developers seemed absolutely fascinated with designing mechs that resembled walking submarines. You see this in games like Kalik, Epidemic, and even the sleeker designs in Mech for the Sega Saturn. The Laucorns totally embrace this aesthetic with a design that, oddly enough, reminds me of a flea, an armored, heavily armed, futuristic flea. It's clear that the game's designers put a lot of thought into the mech design, drawing from the anime and OVA culture of the late 80s and early 90s, where the focus was often on bringing specific mech designs to life. In Robotica, the Laucorns are given that same level of attention to detail. Right from the start, you get a sense of what your mech is capable of. There's no need to unlock a bunch of upgrades or progress through some elaborate RPG system. Your Laucorn is fully equipped and ready to go. Sure, you can pick up a few items to enhance your weapons, but I wouldn't go so far as to call that an RPG system. Of course, the control scheme in Robotica is absolutely archaic, but it's wholly original, and I'm a huge fan of that. While the game is much more action-oriented than something like Space Griffin VF9, it still provides just enough simulation through its controls to make you feel like you're actually piloting the Laucorn. It strikes a nice balance between fast-paced combat and that slight, deliberate weightiness you expect from a mech. In my experience, both the Sega Genesis and Saturn controllers really excel at this kind of light simulation feel, making the game's unique control scheme work surprisingly well. It's not the most intuitive setup by today's standards, but it's one of those quirks that adds to the charm and authenticity of playing Robotica on original hardware, though that isn't to say there aren't other ways to play the game that equal to something nearly identical. There are, after all, USB Sega controllers available through just about every online marketplace these days. Now, Robotica was apparently developed by both Genki and Micronet. This means that the mech designs likely came from the same person behind Kei-Nova and Epidemic, which is a cool piece of continuity for fans of those titles. However, what's strange is that I can't find any concrete information on Micronet or what they even were. For all I know, Micronet could have just been Genki operating under a different label, perhaps to handle the localization of Japanese titles outside of their home country. Then again, I could be completely wrong on that front. If any of you happen to have more info on this, feel free to leave it in the comments section below, and hey, if you like mech and sci-fi content, or just want to join a pretty great community of awesome people, make sure to comment, leave a like, and subscribe. Now finally getting to the horror of Robotica, I feel it comes from the game's eerie environment and unsettling presentation. From the very start, you're trapped in a labyrinth of dark, desolate corridors surrounded by mindlessly aggressive robots that seem to guard an ancient, decaying facility. Daedalus itself feels like a relic of a bygone era, its purpose and function nearly forgotten over centuries. The vast emptiness of space looms behind you, while the unknown stretches out before you, creating a sense of isolation that's hard to shake. It never feels like anything truly alive exists within these walls anymore. As you progress, the sense of unease deepens. The robots that patrol these crumbling halls seem increasingly bizarre, as if they were designed without any clear purpose or function in mind. Their movements and forms follow no logic a human might understand, adding to the unsettling atmosphere as though the technology has evolved beyond human comprehension, or designed for something mankind no longer understands. If you were to imagine being trapped under a rusty truck in a dark garage, you'd be close to the feeling Robotica provides. Though it goes without saying that Robotica brought something to the table in 1995 that was incredibly rare for its time, and more importantly, it wasn't something that would become popular for years to come. I can't say it directly adds to the horror vibe, but it does make Robotica stand out as a pretty unique experience. You see, this game is an early example of an FPS roguelike, and yeah, there were plenty of games with players slogging through procedurally generated dungeons before Robotica, but those were mostly RPGs and on PCs. Now, I won't say for certain that it's the first of its kind, but I do think it's the first console game to really put out this style of gameplay. Of course, with all its innovation, Robotica does suffer from one thing: environmental variety, or rather, a lack thereof. The maps are procedurally generated, sure, but they either end up being large and sprawling or tight and straightforward. Not much changes as you push your way towards floor 32. Yeah, after a certain number of floors, the textures on the walls do change, but it's not in ways that make any sections stand out visually. And while new enemy types do eventually appear, the environments can start to feel a little repetitive after a while. One thing that does push this game more into horror territory, however, is the electrical shortages you run into from time to time. These blackouts cause the lights to flicker in and out, and you can't fix it unless you find one of the randomly distributed mapping computers. So you end up navigating these tight corridors with no idea what's waiting for you. It's unsettling and gives off this eerie feeling that nothing human is left inside the Daedalus. Then to add another layer of tension, the game throws a soft time limit on each floor. If you stick around too long, bug sweepers show up, and they're a serious problem. Not only do they crash in on your Laucorn and deal damage, but they also drop the game's one and only power down. That means if you take one of these things out, the floor you're on will be littered with these items that knock down your weapon's upgrade level, and honestly, that is just brutal design. While Robotica is undeniably an archaic game, it did come out on the Sega Saturn in 1995. I don't think much about it is hurt outside of that lack of variety. That's kind of expected from games of its era, whether they were on the Saturn or the PlayStation. One thing that does get to me personally though is the lack of bosses or truly unique floors. Occasionally you'll hit a special floor where you need to destroy generators or rush through a specific area, but there's only a handful of those per run. And as for bosses, well, there just aren't really that many. Even the final boss is about blowing up the Daedalus core while getting swarmed by enemies in pitch black darkness. It's definitely a tough encounter, and you might get wiped out in seconds, but I hesitate to even call it a proper boss fight. And on a side note, this isn't a negative, but it's worth mentioning, the game also has a cheat system that I stumbled upon by accident. Turns out, when you have a second controller plugged into the Saturn, pressing certain buttons gives you access to cheats, like revealing the map or giving yourself free upgrades and ammo. Now, I did my best to play through the game legitimately, but I can't deny that I ended up with a bit of a helping hand after discovering this by chance. So if, during my footage, you suddenly see my gun loaded with 999 rounds of ammo, yeah, that's because at some point I actually hit one of those cheat buttons. But even with all that extra ammo, the game is still no walk in the park. Sadly, there just isn't much more to say about Robotica. It's a bit of a curiosity, and I love it for a lot of reasons, but after you hit that top floor and finish the game, I can't really see anyone rushing back for a second playthrough. The procedural generation is solid, which makes dying and having to restart a bit less frustrating, but there's just not a lot left to do once you've seen everything, unless you're into speedrunning. That said, it is fun once you get the hang of its mechanics and the Laucorn you're piloting through Daedalus's 32 floors. The challenge feels worthwhile, and I'd argue that it's the kind of game you could revisit every so often, just to soak in that dark, dreary, and eerie mechanical design that so many modern games lack. All I'm saying is, we need the Laucorn back for another run. The world could definitely use more Sega Saturn remasters, and Robotica deserves to be right behind Gun Griffin on that list.